How can we create our own bonsai tree? Well, let's find out. Okay, so the main reason that I'm starting with a plant like this is because it was very cheap. If you look at the tag, you can see that's a $10 plant. I just got this at the, Home Depot parking lot where they have all their nursery stock out. And could we create something better if we spent like $20, $40, $60 on some nursery grown juniper? Probably. But the whole point of this video is to create something for as cheap as possible. And the reasoning behind that is because I felt like the people who would watch this video, most likely they don't feel confident enough to buy $100,000 specimens. You may not even know if you could keep one of these alive. So this way, if you start with a cheap plant and you kill it, it's not really a big deal. So we're gonna see just what we can create from this, and I might just zoom in and kind of just show the shaping of this plant. All right, so an important thing is that when you're shopping and trying to pick out one of these junipers or any other kind of tree, is to kind of take a look at the trunk and the basic branch structure that's there, because we're not going to be able to modify this too severely. Obviously we can't just make another branch magically grow here if we want one here. So I kind of tried to pick the one that had the most branching on it. It has a number of flaws with it still, but basically the framework that we have existing on this tree is kind of an S-shaped, maybe not an S, but like a C. We can always turn that into an S, wiring this apex over. But we have a bend in the trunk here. And then we have like a first branch coming out here, which may be too low to the surface of the soil to be useful. Another branch here that's probably too low to be useful. And then there's a clump of them here, which isn't an ideal situation to have so many of them in one area. Ideally, you'd want them staggered out along this whole trunk. And then the apex here doesn't have too many branches. It's all kind of thin. So the first thing I'm going to do is just go ahead and remove some of the foliage on the inside of this tree, because we're not going to be using any of that in the final design. And, small stuff like this isn't useful for styling it. So I'm going to go through and just kind of take off any of this unnecessary small stuff that's crowding the inside of this plant. And I'll probably do a time lapse of that. So let's just go ahead and go with the time lapse. All right, so basically, like I said, I'm removing all of the foliage that is on the inside of the tree. Now, what I've seen people do before is make what I call lollipop trees, where they will remove like 3/4 of the foliage on a branch, and then you end up with just a clump of the leaves on the tip. We don't need to go that far, but I would say I would remove about 1/3 of the foliage on the innermost section of the branch closest to the trunk. All right, so with everything removed, we can kind of see the basic structure of this tree better. And like I said earlier, I think these branches are way too low. Even if we took this out of the pot and, kind of raised the level a little bit, this is still too low to, look decent. Maybe if we cut it back severely and kind of wired it upwards, but that doesn't really make any sense to me. So I think what we're going to do is remove these branches here on both sides, and then just kind of deal with these branches here. So there's so many branches in this area. What we're going to have to do is kind of make a decision as to which ones stay and which ones go. So I'm going to go ahead, do another time lapse kind of thing. And maybe this would be a good front for a tree. But both of these are still definitely coming off. So I'm going to take a look at this and then start cutting off the stuff that I don't want. Probably do another time lapse, in fact. Okay, so I decided to take that bottom branch off because it's just not really necessary for the final style. It was too low to the ground, and I couldn't really do anything useful with it. So after I cut that off, I decided to take some very heavy gauge wire. It's pretty much the heaviest gauge wire I could find at the hardware store, and it has this rubber coating around it that protects the trunk a little bit. But basically, I wanted to straighten out this trunk so that we can start styling the apex and get kind of a general idea of what the tree is going to look like. So I stiffened it out, and now I'm removing the top branches to bring an apex to the level I want it. So some of these branches are going to be cut off completely, and then the other branches I'm going to trim back to the final size that I want them to be, or at least very close to the final size that they're going to be. Alright, so the next thing that I'm going to do is get a thinner gauge wire, and I'm going to wrap it around the bottom two branches. And so basically what you want to do is kind of, keep the wire close to the trunk and close to the branch. Wrap it in 45-degree angles. What I like to do is hold the wire and make sure the wire is being supported well between my thumbs when I'm wrapping the branch so that that wire doesn't cut into the wood too much. So I wire it, and then what I decided was that the branch on the left was just kind of, looking stupid, so I cut that off, and then this branch right above it, I'm going to wrap that with some wire and kind of wire it down into place where that previous branch was. I think that kind of makes it look better because we have more empty space towards the, bottom trunk. And it just looks kind of like an older tree. If you have too many branches close to the bottom, it starts looking kind of like a bush. So there we have our bottom branches, and now what I'm going to do is prune them back to be a little bit more compact. So the next thing I'm going to do is cut back those middle branches. Those are way too long, and I want to kind of have this triangular shape going. Now, if you think of how coniferous trees grow in the wild, they kind of have that triangle. So now all those branches are sort of in line with some kind of logical shape for this tree. The back of the tree is kind of still, too empty, so we're going to take that branch and kind of wire it back there. And same thing with this one that's in my hand right now. I'm going to kind of push it towards the back of the tree. And then what we're going to do is just, be very careful because those branches are very green. A lot of the stuff on the upper half of the tree was still too small, too green to wire properly. So what we're going to do is get these last two branches and kind of wire them flat. And then that's pretty much all we can do for now. I think it turned out pretty decent, but of course it has to grow. It has to solidify those branches, get some more growth on it, and we'll be cutting it back and styling it for a number of years to come. All right, so there we go. The basic framework is there, and now what I'm going to do is just leave it to grow, establish some more foliage pads. The biggest thing right now is for the tree to grow and solidify into this shape so we can take this disaster of wire off of it eventually, get it wired with some proper wire, and blend into the color of the bark and do some more refinement. But for the basic shape, this heavy gauge red wire seems to work all right. So there we go. Now, I could just leave it in this container. It has a lot of roots, and of course it'll grow the foliage pads. But what I'm going to do is actually just repot it into this pot for nothing more than the sake of this video of it being an instant bonsai tree from the garden center. It's a little warm, but I'll keep this tree in the shade for a little bit after repotting. You usually want to repot things a little bit earlier in the springtime when it's still cold, because then it won't stress the plant out as much as if you you know, repot it, cut off some roots, and stick it in the sun in 95 degrees. But what we're gonna do is just kind of take this out of the pot. We're gonna rinse this off with the hose. You can do it with a root rake, but I think that's a little aggressive. So we're gonna just kind of try and rinse off the soil and see how that goes. So let me do a time lapse of that. All right, so for the next part, of course, we're going to be repotting it. There we have a lot of the root ball washed away. And I took off a number of these roots, kind of, you know, just what I thought would be necessary to support the growth we have on this tree. So what we're going to do is repot it into this bonsai soil, which I make personally. This is a blend of pumice, akadama, and pine bark. And I kind of go a little heavy on the pine bark because I like that for the mycorrhizal fungal colonies to grow on. Plus it retains more water. I found that this stuff drains very quickly. But what we're going to do is put down a layer in this pot. See, you know, how much we need. Not, you know, a whole lot. Might actually have to take off a few more of these roots to flatten it out a little bit more. Then we'll go ahead, place it in here. So the next thing we're going to do is put that tree into the pot and get the wire that we have sticking out of two of the drain holes. It's one wire, just two sides. And we are going to wrap that together and tighten it down. You don't have to go crazy, but basically you just want this tree sitting in the pot very firmly so that it's not wobbling around. If it's wobbling around, you're going to have problems with this plant establishing itself. So that's why you do that. And then I'm going to get the bonsai soil that I made and I'm going to put it into the pot, of course, fill up all the gaps. And then I have the screwdriver. Usually you can take a chopstick, but I was right by the garage. So we're going to poke all that down to get rid of all the air pockets. And then, of course, what we're going to do is water it really, really heavily because we want the root ball that just got cut to be very moist so it can recover. And then, of course, we want all that soil that was really, really dry to absorb some moisture. So, of course, water it very, very heavily. And then what I'm going to do is add some fertilizer. Now, for this step, it's not a really heavy fertilizer. You can see it's 2-4-2. Basically, what this does is it adds a mycorrhizal fungus to the soil. There's also some beneficial bacteria, and that's just going to help the plant establish itself after this stressful experience. All right, so there we have the classic taking nursery stock and turning it into a bonsai tree. Now, of course, turning this into a very magnificent piece in, what did this take me, like half an hour? It's not going to really be possible. Certain stock is grown out for many, many years. It's very old, but we've done what we could with what we have. And like I said, this video is mainly for someone who may not want to spend a whole lot of money, but for $10, minus the soil in the pot, of course, that's what we ended up with. So I'm going to be making a number of videos all about how to take care of this, how to fertilize it, how to water it. And those videos will be coming shortly, but this is it for now, just kind of a general styling. Of course, refinement will be happening sometime in the future, and all of that will be posted on my channel. So if you want to be notified when those videos come out, you can hit the subscribe button down below, hit the bell icon, and you'll be sent a notification when I come out with those videos. But for right now, there is our Juniper bonsai.